Chapter 6: The Constitution and the New Republic. So, the people are seeking a national government to deal with their national problems. They wanted it so they could have a uniform tax, a national commercial policy, and they also feared disorder and violence. They felt that the national government could help take care of those problems. So, the Articles of Confederation, which is what the national government was, had a lack of power to tax. So Alexander Hamilton proposes a convention to overhaul the Articles of Confederation. The earlier meeting, which was the Annapolis Convention, only 5 states were present in 1786. So then there was the Shays Rebellion, which encourages more delegates to come at the next meeting. And George Washington's presence at the convention gives it credibility, and he is chosen as president of the convention. So, James Madison drafts the Virginia Plan, which proposes a legislature where the lower house is represented by state population, which the lower house then elects the upper house. This Virginia Plan was opposed by small states. So the small states proposed the New Jersey Plan, which was a one-house legislature with equal representation. Because, small states, they don't want to be overpowered by the larger states with their larger representation. So what they did was the Great Compromise. So that formed a lower house, wherein the states were represented by population. And the upper house, the states were represented equally, which was 2 members per state. They also made a compromise because in the South, we want our slaves to count so we have more representation. So they made it so the slaves count as 3/5 of a person in determining representation and taxation. And they also made a deal where the slave trade would end in 20 years. We don't know if that would happen yet, but that was their idea at the time. So, there were important questions in forming this new government. James Madison helped answer these questions. First of all, the question of sovereignty. All governments, which they decided was all governments derive power or authority from the people, not like states or federal government. So there's a distribution of powers between the national and state governments. There's also the question of limiting power. So there are many states of power that check each other and prevent a single tyrannical authority from emerging. So, separation of powers is the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and they checked and balanced each other out. The legislative branch could make laws, but the president could veto them or sign them, and then the judicial branch could declare laws unconstitutional. So, September 17th, 1787, 39 delegates signed the Constitution. But it still needed to be ratified. So the rules were changed. Instead of unanimous, only 9 out of 13 states were required to ratify. But then a debate ensued over the Constitution. The supporters of the Constitution called themselves Federalists. They implied they were less committed to a nationalist government than they actually were. So to convince other people of their position, they wrote the Federalist Papers in defense of the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists presented themselves as the defenders of the true principles of the Revolution. They claimed the Constitution would establish a tyrannical government without a Bill of Rights. So The Constitution placed obstacles between the people and the exercise of power, which was a reason the Anti-Federalists opposed it, and also a reason the Federalists supported it. So, all states ended up ratifying the Constitution except for Rhode Island and North Carolina, but some of them agreed only on the condition that a Bill of Rights would be added. So, in 1789, the first election is held. George Washington is elected president unanimously. The only president ever to be elected unanimously. And John Adams is elected vice president. So, what they did was they added the Bill of Rights, which was the 10 amendments to the Constitution, most of which forbade the government to infringe on the rights of the people. Then there was the Judiciary Act of 1789, which established a 6-member Supreme Court, 13 district courts, 1 for each state, and 3 circuit courts of appeal. The Supreme Court also had the ability to rule laws as unconstitutional or not. So, the cabinet is in which the president appoints people to, help in governing. They were executive departments of state, treasury, and war. So, we're kind of along the lines of Federalists, Anti-Federalists, but now it is versus the Federalists and the Republicans. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, favored centralized authority with a complex commercial economy, whereas the Republicans wanted America to leave most of the power in the states and that their nation would remain agrarian rather than commercial. Washington supported the Federalists, but he believed the presidency should remain above political controversy. So, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, he did a lot of programs in helping America's economy. He initiated a program of assumption and funding of the debt, the state and public debt, to create a large permanent national debt so that the more wealthy people in society could have a stake in the nation's future. So, he also wanted to create a national bank to provide a stable center to the nation's weak banking system. He also placed taxes on distillers of alcohol and on some imports. So this promoted American industry from foreign competition. The Federalists' vision was that the nation would play a prominent role in world economic affairs. We're not going to just stay here secluded, at least in economic terms. So, as far as assuming the debt goes, a few of the southern states, well, the problem with assuming the state debt was that states with small debts would have to pay for states who had large debts. So to help get them on their side, they moved the national capital in the South in exchange for the state of Virginia's support. The Bank of the United States was debated over because the Constitution didn't say anything for or against it. But it was passed, and it came into being. However, some people thought these programs served the wealthy elites rather than all of the people in America. As far as the Federalists and Republicans go, the Founding Fathers believed permanent parties or factions were dangerous. Many people thought the Federalists were becoming an overbearing majority. So they formed the Republican Party as a defense against the Federalists. Thomas Jefferson envisioned a decentralized society with small property owners who are mostly in agricultural pursuits. The Federalists were horrified by the French Revolution, but the Republicans supported it. Yay, revolution and all that jazz. Most Federalists were in the Northeast or urban areas, while the Republicans were in the rural areas of the South and West. And here we go. Establishing national sovereignty. So, there is a failure to tie the Western Territory. Is that going to be part of our government? So, because of that, there was a rebellion, particularly the Whiskey Rebellion. Farmers in western Pennsylvania refused to pay the whiskey tax, even going so far as to say no taxation without representation, but you can't do that when it's your own country making your laws. So Washington calls personal army and puts down the rebellion, intimidates them into retreating. So, who controls the western lands? Us or the Indians? Do we want the Indians to be in our federal structure? It's very unclear, these issues. Most importantly, the Constitution did not address the issue of land concerning the Indians. So, politically, America sought to maintain neutrality in the face of war and things like that. So, French citizen Edmond Genet ignores Washington's policies of neutrality. He tried to get American military help to help the French. So, then Great Britain seizes American ships, and so they need treaties. Jay's Treaty settled conflict with Britain and established better commercial relations with Britain. However, there was still fear of the American/British seizure of Spanish territory. So they made the Pinckney's Treaty, which settled American conflict with the Spanish. It protected Spanish Florida and allowed America to travel along the Mississippi River. Washington refuses a third term as president. He sets a precedent for most presidents to follow him that you shouldn't stay in office for too long, or you'll become too infatuated with your power. So, election of 1796, Thomas Jefferson is for the Republicans and John Adams is for the Federalists. John Adams is elected president, and Thomas Jefferson is elected vice president. So, until the 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution, the candidate with the highest electoral votes wins presidency, and the second highest electoral votes wins vice presidency, leading to the awkward result of people with different parties getting the highest positions in the country. So, conflict again. The French capture American ships, and so we attempt to negotiate with France, but they wanted to get a bribe from us first. So, French agents known as XYZ, they demanded a bribe from us before beginning negotiations, and no, we're not going to do that. So that became known as the XYZ affair. So that led to popular outrage against France, and support for war. So the quasi-war is the American Navy plus the British against the French. But the French chose to conciliate before the conflict grew. And so they did a peace treaty after that. So while John Adams is in office, he doesn't want Republican opposition, so they enact the Alien and Sedition Acts, which punishes those who speak out against the government. He wanted to silence Republican opposition to the Federalists. But then some of the states get mad, and they become the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions come to pass. So they were based on the compact theory, which was that the federal government was formed in contract among the states. They possessed only certain powers, and if they went beyond those certain powers, then states could nullify those appropriate laws. So, election of 1800. John Adams versus Jefferson. This is also sometimes called the Revolution of 1800. The supporters of each candidate put the opponent in a horrible light. They would do anything to win, like just say dirty things about the other candidate, and it wasn't nice at all. So people could vote by ballot for two persons. Jefferson and Burr, the vice president Republican candidate, there was a tie. Each state had one vote to break the tie, and Thomas Jefferson ended up being elected after a long deadlock. The Judiciary Act of 1801 reduced Supreme Court justiceships by one, but increased judgeships as a whole. So Adams wanted to keep Federalist control, even though Federalist was going to be like almost non-existent. So because of those newly opened judgeship positions, he spent his last day in office appointing Federalists to those positions. These were called the Midnight Appointments. And so, then next chapter, we will learn about how Thomas Jefferson handles his presidency.